Please welcome Arseny Kapulin.
Hello. How are you guys doing? Was lunch good? Everybody's happy? All right. So the plan for today is I'm going to be joined on stage with three amazing developers, and we're going to talk about various topics that come up often in development of complex Roblox experiences, mostly things that have to do with like engineering, programming using Roblox APIs, and just sort of how do they solve hard problems. We are going to have a Q&A at the end. So while we are discussing other things, sort of come up with interesting questions to ask the panel. And with that, I want to welcome on stage Trey Reynolds from Stylus Studios. All right, Trey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and how are you?
Pretty good. So can you tell us sort of what are you working on these days?
Well, I'm known for Phantom Forces, but these days, that's kind of old news, and so now we're working on a remake of Call of Robloxia, but now it's called Core Phi, and we're really kind of going hard with animation, and we have custom physics, and we have like a wholly server authoritative like client-server model, and so this is basically where my mind's been for the past 3 years.
All right, awesome. We will talk about that. Now, Stephen Leitnik from Easy Games. All right, Stephen, good to have you here. What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I've been working at Easy Games, and that's been great. But on the side, a lot of you probably know me for open source projects such as Knit and data store editor plugin and things of that nature. So keeping on with that stuff.
All right. And last but not least, Joshua Marthiz. How is it going?
It's going well, yeah.
What are you working on? Specific games these days, or?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm working with Nocturne Entertainment on a new game, and one of my own games, which is the first for a couple of years because I've been working on events for quite a while, like Bloxy Awards in 2021 and the Egg on 2018. So yeah.
All right, awesome. So we have a few topics that we thought would be fun to talk about. We are not going to get through all of them. So we'll sort of just see how the discussion goes. But I wanted to start and talk a little bit about, so Trey, you brought up sort of server authority and things like this. There's this interesting, so Roblox as a platform obviously gives developers a lot of freedom. So like you can run code on the client side, you can run code on the server side. We used to just replicate things from the client to the server. Now, thankfully, we don't. But you, of course, have remote events, right? And so technically, you could implement anything on the client and then just have the server blindly trust results. And I heard our cheat detection system is basically flawless now, so you will never have any problems with this approach. Is that true? How you guys are handling, because do you do a lot of computations on the server, or do you do a lot of stuff on the client? Like, how does it work for the games that you guys are working on?
So I guess first, a 5-second anecdote. I literally have a comment in the Phantom Forces source code where I said, like, screw security, and then I proceeded to write a bunch of like horribly insecure code. And that was like back in 2015, and Roblox was handling security really well up until about that point, and then we've been paying for it ever since. So like, it's hard. It's a constant battle between the devs and hackers. Sorry, one more time.
So for example, Phantom Forces, right? So there's a shooter, and the main mechanic is I point a gun at somebody and press the left mouse button. Is the client saying, oh, hey, this person definitively shot this other person, please deduct the damage to the server, or what's going on there?
So that is kind of what's going on there, at least it was in the beginning. And then we've like slowly been moving damage calculation to the server, and like, okay, well, what gun is the user using? Okay, well, we know the server knows what gun the user is using. And then like, okay, well, what body part did they hit? Well, like we know that like if you're standing behind a wall and I say that I shot you or whatever, then like the server can tell, like, okay, well, that doesn't make any sense. And so we've been slowly moving like code from the client to the server. But this also like is not very good, because now whenever you want to write a feature, like maybe we want to make an ammo box that you can throw it on the ground or whatever, you have to like write the feature and make sure it's working and make sure it's fun. And then you have to write it a second time and think about every entry point that like a hacker could use to like, maybe they throw one ammo box, maybe they throw a million, maybe they throw -1, right? Like, and maybe they throw it at infinity and then it ruins the whole game for some reason. And like, this is not good, right? Because your goal becomes not like, how do I make a fun game? It's like, how do I secure the game? And so like using this idea, there's like an idea called server authoritative architecture, which is where you move all the code off of the client onto the server, and the client becomes a simulator for what it expects your state to be on the server. So for example, like you are a client, you have your computer, you're generating inputs. You're moving your mouse, you're pressing buttons, you're rendering new frames, right? Each frame is a new input to the system. And like, so what you end up doing is you create a copy of the client state on the server, and as long as you send the same inputs in the same order to both the server and the client, and you start out with the same starting state, you can expect to reasonably be at the same final state after all this. And so this like can massively simplify your like programming experience, as long as you like deal with all the nuances and whatever, and there's like a lot of hidden complexity, but like, you know, whatever, that's with every system. But then you only have to program a feature once, and it like opens up the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. It probably doesn't help with Phantom Forces, and I guess your new game is like highly competitive, right? So it's like really, 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 really important that you get this right. Steven, what about the games that you've been working on? I'm hoping that somebody here tells me simpler, more like, oh, hey, things are not actually that bad for the stuff that I'm working on, because...
Yeah. I mean, Roblox has obviously done a lot of work to, you know, combat a lot of the exploits, which has been amazing, and you know, that's been amazing. But you know, obviously, it's an ongoing battle no matter what you're doing. You're always going to be having to write code to kind of help prevent other exploits and whatnot. I mean, I think kind of what Trey was saying too, it has been really important for us, which is, I mean, kind of the whole notion that you just don't trust the client. But you want the client to have a good experience still. And so kind of what you're getting at is, you know, the whole idea of like client prediction. And I think that's so key to making an experience feel really good and fluid, is making sure that you nail down the idea that like the client feels what they're doing is instantaneous. At the same time, making sure the server has a final say as to what happens. And if that means that the client mispredicts something and it doesn't happen, then that's kind of the penalty that happens, and that's fine. But yeah, that's, I think, a big focus of ours, is making sure we still have the authority on the server, but the client feels like it's in control.
I have a general question about this, but we'll come back to this. Joshua, what about the games that you're working on?
Yeah, so some of the games I'm working on is not quite as like intense with like super quick. Like you'll notice that in an FPS game, if you shoot and so what we often do is, again, server has a total authority, but to save on replication, we replicate through attributes. So the client knows, okay, this is enabled or disabled, and it knows the animation that should be playing or something, and the server will just flip the attribute. But this also, like with predictive, we can then say, so the client will say, okay, I want to do this thing and expect the state to be enabled and can start that already. So even by the time the server gets it and sends it back, it's already predicted. And if the server actually says no, well, we can just revert. And if the client wants to mess up their own experience by hacking or whatever, they can just have fun with that, but it doesn't really mess up anyone else.
This actually comes to the question that I wanted to ask. So you do client-side prediction, right? Client-side prediction, my understanding, is essentially what all of you guys are doing is you're doing some local modifications to the data model state that are very visibly affecting what the client sees, right? So maybe you do that. Maybe there's like a damage indicator, or maybe there's some UI, or maybe I don't know, maybe you start the death animation for the character, like something complicated is happening, right? The challenge, of course, is that rolling back some of this stuff might be difficult. And the bad failure case of this, one of the bad failure cases of this is you sort of forget to roll back, and there's some permanent modifications now that are just going to be there. So you have sort of a permanent desync from what the client sees and what the server actually thinks. the more code you write to do client-side prediction, the more difficult it feels to sort of make sure this doesn't happen. Do you guys have like frameworks, approaches, like some systems built so that this doesn't happen? And also, how do you test this stuff? Because some of these things, right, they would only happen under cases where maybe you have latency, maybe actually many people are actually actively playing the game, so it feels difficult to replicate some of these failure cases.
So we have basically the entire client state as far as what is synced between the server and the client. We have it all in just one table, and we actually rebuild the entire world every frame. And like, so we know what the map is, we know what the lighting is, we know what the, where all the character models are. And so like, you can do a lot of, like this sounds very expensive, but you can do a lot of optimizations and say, okay, well the map hasn't changed since the last frame and whatever. And like, but the character model has and like whatever. And so this ensures that if the state changes, there's no events that need to be fired. We just pull the state again every frame and we just rebuild the world however it needs to look. And so rollback is essentially it's thought-free, like we don't have to reason about the system, but certainly like you have to be careful about the way you actually go about implementing this.
So this is interesting. This sounds a little bit like what React-based UIs do, where you have some sort of virtual representation of the state of the world, and then you never actually like modify it directly, so to speak. Like you always have the snapshot, right, from the earlier stage, and then you have some function that efficiently changes the whole data model on the client, but it just caches like a whole lot, so that if something doesn't change, you actually don't have to rebuild it.
Right. So this is how this works, and also, as far as resyncing is concerned, like this is like most of the complexity of any system. We just like you have to make sure that if the client desyncs from the server, that the server knows this, can be able to serialize the entire client state and send it to the client, and then like this will be out of date. So there will be missing inputs, and then once the client receives the like the old state, it needs to resimulate all the inputs since the state was created to get to catch up back where it was. So like there's a lot of nuances, but anyway, yeah, we do have like a DOM.
I'm guessing this is why you guys have like your own physics simulator and stuff.
Yeah, but you don't have to do it.
Yeah, right.
Like the more server authoritative stuff you have, the better. But like it doesn't have to all be server authoritative.
There is some balance. What about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to that in terms of the whole idea that you need to be able to reconcile a state. So the server has an idea of what it should be at, but the client by that point has already gone ahead. And so at that point, you need some way for the client to sync up with what the server now says is true, but then you're all behind and everything. So you gotta, the server sends back to the client what it thinks it should be at, and then it has to replay everything to make sure it's back up. So I mean, personally, I don't have any frameworks or anything like that dealing with this sort of stuff yet. I think for a lot of Roblox devs, it has been kind of a new environment to kind of find ourselves in and learn. And so I've been doing a lot of reading on it and seeing what other people do, but personally, I don't have anything at the moment.
Yeah, and just to hop on the testing side, I think like for us, it's useful to like test on lower end devices with less memory, etc., but also to have a wide pool of testers. So we'll test on like a bunch of people will be in the UK and test with someone where their ping is like 200. And things like this with like a lot of testers who try things you'll never think of, that really helps it to catch some things.
That's interesting. I do wonder, for UI, right, there's like now ROACT and stuff like this. It's almost like there's an opportunity at some point in the future for somebody to try to build some sort of generic like reconciliation data model thingy that like helps with this. One final thing I wanted to quickly ask about the exploits. Do you guys usually deal with the platform-wide stuff, like, oh, somebody figured out how to speed hack and that affects every Roblox game? Or is it like, okay, I'm gonna be dedicated and figure out how to be the best at phantom forces by virtue of an exploit instead of by actually getting good at the game? And so you're sort of dealing with a very targeted attack on your specific game that has your specific remotes in mind and like works with them.
Oh, we are very targeted. Oh, yes. at this point, like everything that we can secure is basically locked down, but there's a lot of wiggle room for people to get around. Like, I don't know. Yeah, we are very targeted. So anyway, next.
Same. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the whole Bedwars team myself, but I work with them, and I've heard a lot from them how they have whole communities dedicated to trying to cheat, and having to have our own dedicated team to help prevent that. So a lot of work is going into that all the time.
Yeah, thankfully the games I work on haven't really been that competitive, so we don't have so many targeted people. But yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It feels like way back, right, when like filtering enable didn't exist and stuff like this. I think almost the only thing we saw was platform-wide stuff, and now there's still some platform-wide. But I feel like maybe one big next step from the Roblox perspective is a lot of the stuff that you guys are talking about, it like makes sense, but it's also difficult to build up from scratch, right? And it's difficult to make sure it works and things like this. And we give relatively little control as a platform in terms of, oh, I want like a custom detection logic for X or custom reconciliation, or like, can I roll back physics and stuff like this? And a lot of the stuff is difficult to solve in a generic manner, but I feel like essentially the battle has moved from, there's like a ton of platform-wide stuff to like, okay, great, phantom forces, Yeah. Switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you guys about the other network-related topic, which is streaming. Do any of you guys use streaming in your game?
Yeah, we use streaming, and even just kind of handling when players are on lower devices. So we use like a lot of collection service tags, atomic bindings, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically waits for an instance to be added on collection service, but also waits for specific descendants to be added. So you don't have to wait for child, and you know something's only going to run code when it's all ready. So we use lots of things like that. And then again, with the attribute state set by the server, if something's added, the server would have already set if it's enabled or disabled or any stats, and then you can just load it into the state it needs to be. So that's kind of how we do it, and it really lowers on like part replication. It's just added and then an attribute or two.
Did you start from streaming in your game in general, and did you start with this system in mind, or is it something that you had to like retrofit later after you started kind of figuring out how to work in this environment?
Yeah, so on this specific game, I joined the team after they'd started, but they've got a previous game, and performance is really a thing because it's like a big world and a ton of stuff loading in. So it was kind of something they thought of like from the start, like this is important. So.
No love for streaming from the rest of the panel?
No, on my own personal project, yes. I think one thing I've learned, I think as an engineer, it's very easy to want to over-engineer everything and take control of everything. One thing I will give Roblox a lot of credit for is usually we don't have to. So I think streaming enabled is a good example of that, where it has just improved so much over the years that if I want to build a massive world and I want people of all devices of whatever memory they have, whatever capabilities they have, I don't really have to worry about that anymore and write my own LOD systems or anything. I can just click a checkbox and let the system handle it, and it has done wonders. So yeah, it's much better in today's state, and I really appreciate that.
I'm wondering, actually, I should know this. I forget if like atomicity for models is generally available now, but like anybody used it? Because I know essentially streaming for a while was in the state where there was like zero developer controls, right? Which I think is good as a forcing function on us, because it really forces us to make sure that it's as good as it can be. At the same time, it doesn't actually fully work, because you have to be able to say like this thing is persistent, this thing is atomic, stuff like this. I don't know if you guys had a chance to like play with any of this.
It's good. Someday we will use streaming. Someday it will be good enough.
I think there's like other. I remember I think we had discussion with Phantom Forces team like a while back. And like I think in some of these cases there is difficult gameplay sort of restrictions. Like if you have a sniper rifle and you're expecting to be able to snipe somebody from one end of the map to the other one, then the whole concept of streaming starts to break down a little bit.
You can have multiple focus points.
Right,
you can have,
right,
like,
right.
You know, whatever.
Yeah. There's complexities involved in this. Cool. One general topic I wanted to also talk about is sort of performance, right? And obviously super important to many developers on the platform. There are sort of two things I wanted to ask. One is, what tools do you use to look at performance? For example, microprofiler, script profiler, do you have custom timing system and stuff? And do you do this analysis like, oh, the game is slow, let me pull up some tools and look at this? Or do you have some sort of analytics reporting where you're like, okay, let's just, we have like a system and the system should take X milliseconds and we'll report this to our backend and like look at this, like, is any of that stuff going on?
So people certainly say that early optimization is the root of all evil, but like we still fall into this camp anyway.
Attributed to Donald Knuth.
Yeah. So if I'm in game, I probably also am checking out the microprofiler. Like it is just cool to see, but also if you have not used the microprofiler before, you can open it up by doing Control F6 while in game, and do Control P to pause, and you can like go through the individual frames, and you can actually like use this profiler to profile your own stuff too. So like you can do debug before like a code block that you think might be slow. You can do debug.profile begin and give a little string tag like, oh, this is the shooting code or the rendering code. And then at the end of the code, you say debug.profile end, and then you'll be able to see it as a tag, as like a line segment in the microprofiler, along with like what the average frame time is, how many calls there are per frame, like, you know, how much time that specific call took. And this is like extraordinarily useful. And you can also do there are other features where you can like click on several of them, and then it'll come up with a thing in the bottom right that shows you real-time analytics whenever you unpause. It's like a wonderful tool. But yeah, we do it all the time.
And then what about the others?
Yeah, I agree. We do it all the time. And like, you know, I wouldn't call it a micro-optimization to look at the microprofiler.
Right.
No, I think
it's good to just keep it in mind.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
I think it's so important that you're looking at the profiler often and early and making sure that like, are there hotspots that show up early? And if there are, let's address those before they, you know, snowball into bigger issues down the line that are harder to fix. So yeah.
Yeah, we also look at like the memory usage, especially after we do an update. Before we publish anything, we'll take a look back and see, okay, is everything as it should be? And yeah, we catch some things there sometimes.
Is this a manual process as well?
Yeah, so we'll actually go in and take a look and compare it to last time and stuff like that.
How much do you guys do this? So it makes sense to do all of this when you're developing a game. One big issue might be that you guys probably all have pretty good rigs, and there's like a really good graphics card in it, and like a 16-core CPU and whatever, and like 32 gigabytes of memory. But then you look on the sad little mobile device, and it's slow and unbearable. And like, how often, to what extent do you profile as you develop versus like testing on some particularly terrible device?
I've always got an old phone on me, and an old Android tablet. Basically get a $80 device off of Amazon if you can, and use that. I think that's been so critical to find those hotspots faster, making sure that your bases are covered. So.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Did any of you have a chance to use the new script profiler?
Not yet.
No, I haven't.
So I'm going to use this. We launched it. I'm going to use the fact that I'm on the stage to do a little promotion of the new feature. We shipped it like in December, I think, last year. A lot of people still don't know it exists because I think microprofiler has been out for like years and years and years and years. So like it makes sense as a go-to tool. We shipped script profiler, which essentially gives you, it's a different kind of tool. Like it doesn't replace microprofiler. You should use both. But it gives you an easier way to do without having to do manual annotations and stuff. It just tells you, okay, like during the duration of your capture, which is like, I don't know, you capture 10 seconds of the game, like this script code took like X seconds out of this, and these are the call stacks that are expensive, and this function took X. and et cetera, et cetera. We are actively improving some of the stuff in this, but like it's usable as part of Dev Console today. So hopefully that can help. Any of you guys started using the new analytics that we shipped in terms of like the memory on the server and stuff like this? Has that been helpful?
I love them. They're great. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right. That is good. We are closing, we're approaching the 10-minute mark to the end of the session, which is when we are going to take Q&A. I'm going to ask one final question to the panel about the feature that's near and dear to my heart, but please queue up. I think we have 2 microphones in the aisles, and you can ask any questions to anybody on the stage about anything you want. But one final question is, did you guys see the native code beta? Are you excited about this?
Oh, yes. Some of our code has seen like a 6x improvement in performance, and like others like 4x. It's like my favorite feature of the year, probably.
I've seen it. I haven't got a chance to use it yet, but I'm very excited to play around with it and see what we can get from it.
Yeah, I think I've used it a little bit, but not as like just before I came. So.
All right. All right. Do we have people at one of the mics and not the other mic, which is great. Because we won't have to alternate. All right, so please say your name or Roblox handle or whatever suits you and ask your question.
Hi, my name is James. My username is Quinty. The question I have is around memory and performance. So a lot of times we're talking about CPU usage, and that's always a constraint. But another constraint we've ran into on low-end devices is memory. And this affects not just like what you're programming, but also like artistic style, even maybe the gameplay you're designing. Because if you have a ton of guns in a game, each one's going to use some memory, and then maybe you want to like reduce that. How do you profile, balance, and think about memory usage on Roblox like that?
So I think in the wide case, like streaming is your friend. Like we don't use it, right? But like no, it really is. Like streaming is wonderful. As far as like you can do custom LODs as well. So like maybe character models use so we use low polygons for our character models, and that really keeps memory usage down. Like we currently have some problems with module scripts taking up too much memory. Like our Lua heap is like 200 megabytes, but we're like working on getting that down as well. And then like another thing is that if you have like a lot of state that's held in the heap, then like a lot of the time it's just because you have like a bunch of Lua tables of Lua tables of Lua tables. And in many cases, if you have like a big array of a bunch of tables, like you can transpose this data. So maybe you can have a time list, a position list, a velocity list, or whatever. And this actually like defragments your memory, and it makes like it's really good for the CPU cache and like everything. I don't think that answers the entire question, but like there's more people to answer. So,
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think we kind of take a approach from the start of like making sure we reuse a lot of meshes, reuse a lot of textures, lower res textures. I think if we just went and tried to like optimize at the end, it wouldn't really work. So we're trying to work from the start with all the artists and the meshes and everything straight through.
Yeah, same. I think taking advantage of like GPU instancing and whatnot has been helpful, making sure, at least at the GPU memory level, that's been helpful. So.
All right, thank you.
So my name is Sigmatech on Roblox. I work for Softwares Interactive. I have a question about microprofiler because we often see spikes in the microprofiler, and we'd like to diagnose and see what's really wrong with our experience. But oftentimes we go into the microprofiler, we see something, but we're not really sure what the labels mean. I'd like to know, like maybe I just am not aware. But are there more resources to understand what's going on in microprofiler? And in addition, specifically really troubleshoot problem areas, because like sometimes debug labeling things doesn't, we can't search it in the microprofiler as well. So it makes it really hard to use it, but we really love to use microprofiler to
That's probably a question more for me. So we have had cases in the past where file a bug report on dev forum where you're like, this profile makes no sense. What the heck does this label mean, and what is even going on there? Because I think a lot of the stuff is like annotations inside the engine. We have had many cases where we either looked at the profile, or we meaning the Roblox engineering team, or somebody posted the profile on that forum, and we changed some markers, renamed something, added some information. Unfortunately, a lot of this isn't really documented because it's also in flux. Like, oh, the physics engine implementation has changed. Now some of the markers that used to make sense don't really make sense. But I don't know if you guys know, maybe there's like some community, I know some community members have had sort of these informal like tutorials, something like this posted on the profile, or I don't know if you can recommend anything like this. Around this.
I think Mullets Gavin made like a little like cheat sheet, but it's like sometimes like incomplete on some things. But
Yeah, I'll often just search the dev forum for the tag and see if anybody else has asked. And
Yes.
yeah.
all right. Well, I guess I just being able to like search for our tags is it would be super powerful for our diagnostics and whatnot.
Yeah, that makes sense. I forget if there's like an HTML version, but maybe it doesn't have search as well. So I think both of these essentially would be file a feature request in dev forum, or file bug reports or feature request in dev forum when you find specific tags that are just nonsensical. Like, for example, one thing that at some point we ran into is when you are doing collision detection. At some point there was just like a tag there that just said like collision detection or whatever. But now it should have how many parts does it have to resolve? How many collision points does it have? And then sometimes you can resolve this by saying, oh, okay, there's like only a few parts colliding, but for example, there's a ton of contact points. And this can happen when there's a complex mesh like embedded inside another complex mesh. So we are trying to add more information when requested, but without the request, nothing will change. So yeah, I think this is just something to interact with through the forum feature requests, cool. Bug reports.
Yeah, I'll submit that.
Right, thank you. All right.
Hello, I go by Noble_Draconian on the platform. And I had a question about sort of systems that the client needs to have like almost full authority over, and sort of how you sort of counteract exploits with that. For example, if you have a game where a player can throw an axe or throw a dodgeball, or you have moving platforms but they're done on the client because you want that smooth physics and no latency. How do you sort of counteract like exploits for that, because it is mostly client authoritative?
You actually don't have to have really anything on the client. The only thing you need to trust is like how often it's rendering a new frame, and like mouse and keyboard and like touchscreen inputs and whatever. Though like touchscreen inputs maybe is like, don't do that. But as far as, I think the reality is anything that the client has authority over, you have to like just work really hard to constrain what is a reasonable input on the server. Like, you throw an axe from here, well, maybe the client claims that like the axe got thrown from the light over there or whatever. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's not within a reasonable radius of the character. Throw it out, right? And maybe give them the axe back or something. Like be nice about it. And that's like really all you can do. You just have to lock it down as much as you can.
I think alternatively too, I think that's a great approach too. If you have the resources, and some people might disagree with me on this, but if you are doing something as simple as like an axe throw, you can probably calculate that all, parabolic curve or whatever, and just simulate it immediately on the client, and then do the same thing on the server, make sure they all line up within some margin of error, and still trust the server and still have the client look silky smooth. Mm-hmm. So.
And you could probably even do some ping calculations and like relatively, okay, how fast can they move if they run? What ping do they have? And then you have like a delta for like how much you can adjust for any corrections.
Mm-hmm. So some sort of like heuristic on the server, right, where you observe the data that the client is telling you that they think happen, and then like have margins of error, but then at some point you say this is unrealistic within the parameters of the physics of what I think should happen, so like don't do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm L2000. I'm wondering, like, do you do any unit and integration testing? And if you do, like, what kind of tools do you use for that?
Was it unit and integration?
Unit and integration.
Okay,
testing, yeah.
so unit and integration testing is like something that is more helpful for larger studios. And a large studio, we are not, so.
I use it for utility modules, unit testing specifically, and very little Mostly things are self-tested across the board, and with games especially, I think it's almost more valuable just to have some people that can play test rather than writing a bunch of code that's going to break because you change a feature next week. So.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't really work in large teams at the moment, so yeah.
I'm going to ask a related thing. Do you guys have dedicated people on the team who mostly play test? Or do you do a lot of play test? Like every single person who's working on the game is doing the shared amount of sort of play test?
Yeah, we spend like half our time working on the game and half the time like play testing the game. So that seems like the good split.
Absolutely. That and getting community involved. Try to do some early
like
tests.
following people around who have complaints and like making tweaks and say, please rejoin the game, like, and tell us like if this made your performance better or whatever.
Yeah,
all right.
Same for me.
All right, we're going to answer one last question. I'm sorry, there's 2 people on the line, but we are out of time, and we are all at RDC the remainder of the day. So if you can find us in the crowd, then we can talk more.
All right. So hello, I'm Dan, and what I want to talk about is a bit orthogonal. So developer experience is really important when considering all of these optimizations. We've all heard the common advice about using maids and binders, but what's your most niche tip for keeping your developers sane while you're optimizing your programs?
I would say organization is key. Apart from all the modules and things and patterns that you use, making sure that your team has a good and concise plan for how you're going to lay out the structure of your code projects. I think that goes a long way to make sure people stay a little bit sane at least.
Yeah, I am also building on that. Like, I also like keeping my systems entirely separate. So one person can work on one, and then that just interfaces with another, but they're still 2 separate stacks, so people can work on their own thing and not get on each other's toes.
Yeah, we do like the opposite, where we will both sit at one computer and trade the keyboard back and forth. And so,
my niche tip from personal experience in working on the internals is take multiple walks throughout the day between the problems, and it's amazing how much shorter can the problem, how much quicker can you solve the problem if like midway you're like, okay, I'm gonna go for half an hour and walk around and think about this.
and like get good sleep too, right? Like major thing.
Not at RDC, but after.
No. Never here.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you the panel. Please give them a round of applause.